Thank you. Ms. Navarez, roll call.
Chair Longstreet,
Here.
Vice Chair Clark, here. Commissioner Armbruster, Commissioner Lesner-Buxton,
Here.
Commissioner Martinez-Cohen,
Here.
Commissioner McGill, here. Commissioner Perry.
Yes.
And today we are welcoming Commissioner McGill for her first meeting with us. She was just appointed to the commission last year. And welcome. And would you like to say a couple words?
Just a couple.
Okay.
I'll just say, really excited to be appointed to the commission. Look forward to getting to know everybody on the commission, to working with all of you, and to digging into the breadth and depth of issues that the Parks and Recreation works with. So, anyways, thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
What? Okay. Well, we welcome you, and we are happy to be at a full complement of commissioners, so that helps us. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
Chair Longstreet, the only thing I would note that we might be delayed in taking your first street tree item since the applicants are at another hearing right now. So we may skip that and move to the second one.
Okay, thank you very much. We will do that. Do we have any written communications? None. Public comment. Any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. The total amount of time is 15 minutes, but we have not received any speaker slips, so if I see no one rushing to the mic, we will close public comment. I do not see our youth council member, so we will move on to commissioner committee assignment reports. Mr. Perry, do you have anything?
I did attend the arts and crafts. It was a cold night. They were a small number, and happy to have us there.
Good.
I also did attend last week on January 17th, the Creeks Restoration and Water Quality Improvement meeting. And the one thing the main report that I thought was interesting to bring back information to this commission is that they did a stormwater management program report that did talk about an audit that they had last year in mid-2017, and they were updating some of their regulations about construction sites and the runoff and things that can go into the storm drain from construction projects. There is quite a bit of regulation involved with you getting the permit to the project, but after the fact they weren't doing enough of the follow through to make sure they were complying. So I thought that was interesting. And then just some other items about identifying illicit discharges. They did receive a few violations, and they were in the process of fixing those things to be in compliance. And there was a lot of question about just regular water quality monitoring, especially after the storms and the mudslides. All of that stuff sort of falls under the Creeks Division Water Quality Research and Monitoring Plan. And so there's ongoing, monitoring going on, but they didn't really have a ton of information about how terrible the mudslide affected the water. I mean, there's definitely elevated levels, but what they can do to fix it there's not really much that can be done. But it was a good meeting, and they did elect their new vice chair, who will be the chair next year. So they had a good meeting.
Great. Commissioner Lesner-Buxton.
I was unable to attend the neighborhood advisory meeting.
Okay. Ms. McGill, we will assign you something in the future, but Ms. Clark.
January 4th, I attended the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting, and we discussed the trees and street tree designations on our agenda today. And then today I attended the Park Foundation board meeting where we reviewed our monthly financials and talked about opening a separate account for funds raised for the Carrillo Arts Pavilion and Bathhouse renovation, among other things.
Thank you. And I attended the Neighborhood Advisory Council meeting. made great progress on the goals that were discussed in November. Ms. McCaffrey did a wonderful calendar for the year and put the ideas that we had in November on paper and organized them, and so that was very helpful. We also discussed Ortega Park again, and there is still concern, and we had speakers from the Ortega Park area. One of the things we did do was ask Matt Four, who works in the city administrator's office, to take it back to the NITF, which is the interdepartment meetings within the city, because all of the issues that are happening at parks are not necessarily parks issues. They're social issues, they're parking issues, they're public works issues. So it needs to have solutions that are interdepartmental, and it's going to take a lot of work. So, but we did have some good conversation about it. Thank you. We now go to, are there any staff communications at that point? No. Ceremonial items, employee recognition.
Chair Longstreet, members of the commission, and for our new Commissioner Miguel, we generally talk about employees that are recognized for 5, 10, 15 years of service, which happens at the beginning of every month at City Council. We actually didn't have any, which is surprising because we have some great staff with longevity in the department in either December or January. However, one of our employees, Robert Funai, was recognized as a local hero in last year's Santa Barbara Independent. And for those of you that don't know Robert, he is a key fixture at the AC Postel Rose Garden, which is located in Mission Historical Park. He also works at Alice Keg Park, and so we're pleased that he got recognized by the community. The city always tries to recognize its employees, but it's always even more special when he gets recognized in the community as well. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Give him our congratulations. And that brings us to the Kiwanis Club recognition.
Okay, Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the department would like to recognize the Kiwanis Club of Santa Barbara for their support of adapted programs in hosting the annual Thanksgiving Luncheon. The luncheon is held each November, and we host it at the Creo Recreation Center, and it serves a Thanksgiving feast to individuals with disabilities, their caregivers, and family members. The Kiwanis Club plays a lead role in hosting this event. They work with the Adapted Programs team in coordinating logistics. They provide a $500 donation to help with event expenses. They secure all of the turkey and all of the ham donations. They also organize all of the volunteers that work the day of the event. And most impressive, and you'll see the team right here, they prepare the entire Thanksgiving meal. The turkey, the ham, the cranberry sauce, the fixins, the stuffings, for over 300 individuals. This past year, we celebrated the 39th year that the event has been held, and we're looking forward to next year's 40th anniversary. And we've been able to do this event and be successful with it because of the because of the Kiwanis Club of Santa Barbara. So the department would like to extend its gratitude to the Kiwanis Club, to its current president, Anita Ho, and to all of the members that support the Thanksgiving Luncheon for their dedication, their commitment. We really appreciate their support of adapted programs in providing engaging activities for individuals with disabilities. Thank you.
Let's see if that works better. There aren't words to say thank you for 39 years of support to the members of our community. How much work that is, but I know it's an act of love for for you. Having known Anita as long as I've known her, I know that she encourages everyone to give and join in, and she makes it fun. And I know that you all make it fun for the people that attend the Thanksgiving luncheon. So thank you so much, and for all the support throughout the community for the things that you do. This certificate is just a small token of our appreciation, and it says, for your commitment, hard work, and leadership, Parks and Recreation Department Adaptive Programs Annual Thanksgiving Luncheon for the past 39 years. The department appreciates your continued support and dedication to providing enriching opportunities for individuals with disabilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to give, I think you get that. Would you like to say a few words?
I'll just say that 39 years ago, there were only about 50 people at Work Incorporated. And we prepared the meal and went there, and it was a kind of a assembly. And we would actually move the work that they were working on to put the food there for them. So it's been great to watch the change over the last 39 years. And Work Incorporated, the work, and I'm not going to get the whole word, but the K in Work Incorporated is Kiwanis. And I'd been doing this program for probably 30 years before I realized the K was Kiwanis. So that's like how we are in the community, just doing something without, the recognition. And then I have our Lieutenant Governor for Kiwanis is Ed Quay, and he's here, and he represents the Ventura and the Santa Barbara area. And then we have Lisa. She's one of our members. She's been there longer than I have, and she's here to support us.
Well,
We
welcome.
really appreciate you
Come on,
having
come right up
Anita
to the
speak
mic.
up.
You have to go.
Come right up to the mic. We want to.
We really appreciate you having Anita speak up today because she likes to sit in the background and let everybody else speak. But she's larger than life. She makes things happen. We're lucky to have her as the president of the Santa Barbara Club. And it's really great to work with the city, especially the Parks and Recreation Department. Work Incorporated is one of those programs that has been here a long time. It's work opportunities and rehabilitation by Kiwanis. That's what the acronym means. So not too many people know that, but it goes with what we've done long-standing in our collaboration with the city. And thank you very much.
Well, thank
I just
you.
have one quick thing. Beside it being the best day of my life, every single November, it is. I have a 90-year-old mom who comes and she helps me bus all the tables, and she was so happy. She had a little apron on, and one of our guests put $1 inside her apron and said she was just the best waitress he had ever had in his whole life.
That's wonderful.
Chair
Thank you so much.
Chair Longstreet, if I could just jump in. I think Emily Fox was so excited to do the presentation, she forgot to introduce herself. She is a senior recreation supervisor. Actually was recently promoted to that position. She started as a recreation supervisor. And then Julie Thomas is also here in the audience, and many of you know her from our adapted programs. And then back to Anita, our longtime Parks and Recreation staffer. As both a permanent employee and an hourly employee, she started and created the heart and soul of our adapted programs. So we're really pleased that she still comes back and does some great things with us.
If you want a job done, call Anita. Thank you. It's always nice to start our meetings off with honoring people, but this program is very special for us. Okay, now we are to consent items. And first we have the summary of council actions. And did anyone have any questions on those issues? We have a couple of months worth since we missed December. Okay, then brings us to the minutes.
Chair
Yes.
Longstreet, I'm sorry. If I could just jump in.
Sure.
Although we missed December, I want to just take the opportunity to acknowledge that in November you have the approval of the construction contract for Cabrillo Pavilion. And that has been a labor of love for this department since 2011. And Chair Longstreet came to the meeting and said, we've been talking about this for 20 years. And the City Council approved moving forward with that contract, knowing that we still have some fundraising to do to make the project whole. I'd like to report, and we usually do this the following month, I should say, but yesterday the City Council also approved the construction contract for the Cabrillo Ballpark renovation project. And that something speaks specifically to the issues you raised about Ortega Park, where we had significant issues with safety, security, inappropriate use of the park, and we've come up with a plan that we anticipate will really revitalize that park, and we're going to move forward with construction in the next couple of weeks.
I would just add also, because we had a new council yesterday, and I did watch that presentation, and we're a fairly new commission here, but that project at the Cabrillo Ball Field came out of meetings with the East Side Advisory Committee years ago. Many things like the walking path and, adding uses came directly from the residents of the East Side. So it has been vetted, although it seems like it just came out of nowhere sometimes. It has been vetted over a long period of time and is answering requests of the residents in Santa Barbara. So I'm happy to see it moving forward. Do you have a timeline on that, how that looks?
Chair Longstreet and commissioners, the actual active construction where we're doing irrigation and turf and fencing and all that sort of stuff is likely a 3 to 4 month process. Then we have a waiting period for the turf to be in a position where people can play on it. So it will be closed for probably 8 months. In about May, we'll start doing the restroom renovation. So one of the things that council also approved is the interior renovation of the restroom. So it'll be some time, and there'll be some disjointedness about East Beach area for some time with the pavilion project underway, Cabrillo Ballpark underway. At the same time, we still have the Beachway, we still have the beach, we still have Dwight Murphy, and so we're finding ways to make sure that programming that would have occurred at Cabrillo Ballpark can move somewhere else, and similarly programs at the pavilion, particularly our summer programs, how we accommodate and manage them despite the fact that the building is closed for 18 months.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions regarding these items? Okay. So we have the minutes. We received them in our packet. Any changes or corrections? Motion?
I'll make a motion to recommend the waiving of the reading and approve the minutes for the regular meeting November 15th, 2017.
Okay, do I have a motion? Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? One abstention, yes. Okay, and that brings us to our street tree items. Mr. Downey.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, we're going to go to the second item. Bear with me.
Okay.
Well, there we go. The 5B1 is 414 Chapala Street. There is a project proposed for this lot to improve it. As part of that project, the driveway entrance is going to shift, and the tree closest to you in this picture will be immediately adjacent to the driveway apron. Their request is to remove both king palms in front of this property and somewhat match across the street the jacarandas. Both the king palm and jacaranda are designated for this section of street, so their request is consistent with the street tree master plan. The Street Tree Advisory Committee reviewed the project and determined that the one palm that's going to be farther away from the new driveway apron, it's not necessary to remove that tree for the project, and there would be space for jacarandas on both sides of the palms. The recommendation is to approve the tree that will be closest to the new driveway apron on the condition that 2 jacaranda trees go in as replacements.
Okay. We have no speaker slips for this item. Are there questions of staff? when I drove by the area, I can see the reason for that in that area. I think the more jacarandas and more trees will be lovely in that spot. So, Ms. McGill?
Just a question, because I drove by it too, and so the jacarandas, would they? So they'd both be closer to us than the trees that you're recommending not be removed, yeah? I'm just wondering about the canopy of the jacarandas and the density of trees at that point.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner McGill, the exact location of the new trees hasn't been determined, but the idea is to kind of spread them out to kind of cover the frontage of the property, with retaining, if the commission so concurs with the committee, retaining one of the palms will require an adjustment of their proposed location for one of the palms, but there is sufficient space along that frontage for all three trees.
Okay. Any other questions? A motion?
I'll make a motion that the commission approves removal of the palm closest to the driveway on the condition that 2 replacement jacaranda trees are planted at 414 Chapala Street.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. That passes.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, item 5C1 is 726 North Lacumba Road. The applicant is requesting to annex the property at 726 into the city. It is currently in county jurisdiction. The various city requirements would cause them to make improvements to the Penn Place roadway, which would necessitate the removal of 10 various trees on adjacent properties, not on the property in question. So these trees are actually along the opposite side of Penn Place from the subject property. Again, the public improvements would necessitate the removal of 10 of those trees. The committee reviewed that. You will see at a future meeting an item to designate trees for Penn Place. As yet, there is no street tree designation for that street, so that will come forward at a future meeting. The committee felt that the project was warranted and the improvements to the roadway were warranted, but the loss of 10 trees was pretty big with a proposed replacement of 3 street trees. The committee felt that community would lose by that proposal. Their recommendation is to approve the removals on the condition that, one, the trees are placed on a 1-to-1 ratio on private property to replace the loss of these trees, and that as the design of the roadway moves forward in the process, that it be designed in such a way to accommodate at least 6 street trees as a second condition for the approval of the removal of these setback trees. So the committee's recommendation, to go over it again, approve the removal of all 10 trees on the condition they're replaced on a 1-to-1 ratio on private property, and that the design accommodate at least 6 street trees.
Okay. We do have a speaker for this item, but at this point we can ask questions of staff, if anyone has. Yes, Mr. Perry.
At whose expense will the trees be replaced? The property owners or the cities?
Commissioner Perry, that would be the applicant's expense.
Okay. Ms. McGill?
Just to absolute clarity, for all 16 trees, it would be the applicant's expense?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Other? Ms. Clark?
Did the Street Tree Advisory Committee make any kind of recommendations of what types of trees would be the replacement trees?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Clark, they the proposed parkways are going to be different sizes. There is a section where there will be larger, wider parkways which would accommodate a large tree. The project is splitting one parcel into 3 parcels. So there's going to be, if it all gets approved, there'll be 3 homes along there. 2 of the homes will have a narrower parkway, so they're looking at opportunities for some large trees in the really wide parkway and some smaller species in the smaller parkway, but they have not yet discussed actual species.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, Ms. Carlson, come on up. And you'll have 2 minutes to tell us.
All right.
Hi.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the applicant, the owner for this project. We're generally supportive of the recommendation. We are acknowledge the cost that these trees will have with them, as well as the overall cost of the project. And we are in supportive of the recommendation and look forward to this approval so that we can move forward with the rest of the project.
Thank you. Are there any questions of the applicant's representative? No. Okay. Thank you. All right. Yes.
Seeing how the applicant is agreeing with the Street Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation, I would move that we should concur with this Street Tree Committee recommendation to remove all of the trees on the condition that they be replaced with the 1-to-1 ratio on the private property, and in addition having the 6 minimum street tree accommodation.
I'll second.
Second.
Okay. We have seconds everywhere. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. Okay, that takes care of the removals. And now we are to our street tree master plan species designations.
Chair Longstreet, for the benefit of the new commissioner and the audience out there, the street tree master plan was adopted by City Council in 1977. And an attachment to that street tree master plan was a listing of what trees should be planted on each section of street. The municipal code allows for changes to that street tree designation by the Parks and Recreation Commission, and this is what these next items are for. In the 600 block of Anacapa Street, at the corner of Ortega, is a project going in for a 3-story multi-use complex, and they're desiring to plant trees in the parkway out there. The 600 block of Anacapa Street currently has several magnolias in it, but the designated tree is king palm. The applicant wishes to continue with the theme of already planted magnolias and plant another one along this property. In order to do that, we need to add it to the as a co-designation. The committee determined that it was appropriate and fitting for the location, and their recommendation is to approve the co-designation of Magnolia grandiflora for the 600 block of Anacapa Street.
Okay. Any questions of staff? A motion.
I'll make a motion that the commission approves the change of the street tree designated for the 600 block of Anacapa Street to include Magnolia grandiflora.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? All right. I think that'll look lovely. I think just palm trees there is not enough.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the next item is the 100 block of East Ortega Street for the same project as I previously mentioned. The project is going to have a 3-story building, and the current designation for the 100 block of East Ortega is a mix of windmill fan palm, which is a very slow-growing, fairly small palm, and Mexican fan palm, which is tall and erect as well. The committee felt that the building needed some softening with a canopy tree of some kind. Their recommendation is the Markhamia hildebrandii. It initially grows very upright, which is conducive to the location adjacent to a building there. And as it develops, it'll develop a little wider canopy, but with the building there, it won't really develop canopy on that side so much. So the committee felt that it would do the job of softening that building. So the recommendation is to add a co-designation of Markhamia hildebrandii to the 100 block of East Ortega Street.
Thank you. Questions of staff?
I just have a question about where the words diversity issues came from. If you look at the present species designation, after the 2 designated species, it says diversity issues. Was that included when those trees were originally designated for that block?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Clark, that came about as a part of the tree diversity citywide. This is a species that we have only a few specimens of, so this is a very seldom planted tree so far. So it would address keeping some of those trees in our inventory that we have very few of at this point.
Thank you.
Good point. Okay.
I'll make a motion to concur with the committee and approve the co-designation of the, how do you say it, Markhamia hildebrandii? Hildebrandii?
Yeah.
Okay.
Works for me.
Does it have a common name, or just Markhamia? Is that the common name? Okay.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? All right. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions. Okay. We haven't had this many designations in a while. This is good.
Yeah.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, several of these, the committee stews over trees for several meetings at times, so sometimes they get in a bunch and back up, so that's why you have so many this time. The 100 block of East Sola Street is currently designated Victorian box Pittosporum undulatum. That's adjacent to Alameda Park. The interested party lost 2 pittosporums to a leaf disease that's killing a good portion of that species, and they would like to spruce up the parkway, but they didn't want to plant that tree again when it's having issues. So they wanted to consider a new species. Their recommendation was to consider the pink trumpet tree. The committee had quite a bit of discussion about this tree. We do not have any in our current tree palette now in the city, tree inventory. And there was some concern about how well the tree would do. But if it does well, as you can see, it's absolutely beautiful. Yeah. We've seen some specimens that have done quite well planted on private property in the area, some that not done so well. But part of diversity is trying these trees out. And so the committee felt that it's worth a shot to try these trees in the parkway, given how they've done in some private situations. They also, at a later date, will be recommending an evergreen canopy tree to co-designate with this one. They're still working on that one, but in an effort to allow this citizen to get some trees back in, they wanted to move this forward. So their recommendation is to approve the Hadranthus impetigonosus, pink trumpet tree, and remove the current designation of the Victorian box tree from designation in that block.
I would just like to say that I appreciate that the residents have come forward and asked. They want to replace their trees, and they have shown an interest in what is planted in front of their house. I mean, I really want to commend the resident for that. So it's a good.
Yeah, and is it true that they can't plant that without the designation? That's correct, right?
Right.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, yes, the municipal code requires whatever tree, if someone wishes to plant a tree, it must be consistent with the street tree master plan and therefore designated by the plan.
Got it.
And all that, so that sounds like we're trying to control too much. I think when we've seen the proliferation of live Christmas trees planted in parkways, you see why that happens, because then we end up with trees that really don't fit spaces, and it's difficult to deal with. So there's some thought behind how our parkways are planted. So, okay.
I agree. And when people drive down the streets of Santa Barbara and marvel at how beautiful it is, it's that way for a reason.
It is. It takes some planning.
Exactly.
Thank you. A motion.
Okay, I'll try this one. So move that the committee approve the designation of the Hadranthus impeginosus pink trumpet tree as a designated tree for the 100 block of East Sola Street.
And to...
And remove the pittosporum as a
Okay.
designated tree.
Thank you. Good job. A second.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. And now we're to our last tree. Mr.
Chair
Downing.
Longstreet and Commissioners, again, we had a resident wanting to plant trees that didn't care for the designated tree. So they have put in a request that trees be considered for, a new tree be considered for designation in the 1200 block of Blanchard Street. This street currently has evergreen pear tree as the designated tree, which gets fire blight, and you see it die back as a result of fire blight. It's not something that's dangerous or eventually it will kill the tree, and sometimes it's unsightly. So the committee felt that the block right now is showing some purple leaf plums that are planted there that are doing quite well, and it would be fitting with the block. So their recommendation is to approve Prunus cerasifera purple leaf plum for the 1200 block of Blanchard Street.
Oh, good. Thank you. Questions? Okay.
Can you just clarify what is fire blight? Is that what you're saying? Is that the word? I don't know what it is.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Cohen, the fire blight is a bacterial disease that is spread sometimes by bees, sometimes by wet weather, most often by bees in our community, that affects the trees in the rose family, as well as many other rose family plants. But it causes a dieback, a twig dieback of the infected branches.
Thank you. We
Yeah,
learned
thanks.
something new.
Appreciate it.
All right. Is there a motion to approve this?
I'll make the motion to approve the purple leaf plum code designation for the 1200 block of Blanchard Street.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good
It'll
looking
be
tree.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Downey. I guess we will put off our other item. We'll hold that in reserve. Okay.
Chair Longstreet, if I could make a recommendation, we have Larry Salzman who's applied to the IPM Advisory Committee. If you'd like to take that item in advance of the director's report.
Of course. Yes, come on up, Mr. Salzman. And you're a reappointment for us. You've been
That's
on
right.
IPM for quite a while. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And would you like to tell us why you want to be on the committee again?
Well, I think the committee is doing excellent work. I think the Parks Department is doing excellent work in massively reducing the use of pesticides and herbicides. It's really down to a residual amount that would be very hard to get rid of. And I want to continue to be a part of that.
And thank you for being a part of that. Are there questions of Mr. Salzman? Okay. Do I hear a nomination for reappointment to the IPM?
I will make that nomination for reappointment.
Okay. Second on it?
A second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? You are unanimously reappointed to the IPM committee,
Very
and
good.
thank you very much for all your service.
My pleasure.
I know that it's gotten so much better and so much smoother, so thank you.
Okay, thanks.
And thank you, Mr. Escobar, for that too. Okay, now, on to director's report.
Chair Longstreet, members of the commission. Also, since there's been a couple of conversations about service on our various advisory committees, I might recommend we bring that forward at your February agenda, since we do have a new commissioner and you can look at assignments and see how to move forward. So just stay tuned for that. So for the director's report, a couple of things that are kind of carryovers since we had such a chaotic end to 2017. As you know, the carousel at Chase Pond Park made its way back to Hood River, Oregon in early December. The carousel had been in that location for almost 20 years. A beautiful building was designed to house it, historic, beautiful carousel. The carousel itself, privately owned by Historic Carousels. We worked with them for many years to support their efforts to operate it in a manner that made economic sense for them and also serve the community. And it came to the point with their lease coming to an end and their desire to relocate the carousel in a museum that they have up in Hood River. They requested to be able to remove it a little bit in advance of the end of their lease. We used the opportunity to have a great family event at the park, and we had over 2,000 people show up for our carousel weekend. All the rides were free. Some of our recreation staff put together a great program with a bounce house and games, and we had a hot dog vendor and a variety of activities, and it really turned into a very positive event. I think we didn't anticipate the lines that we would have for people riding the carousel. So it was so popular. I know Sunday probably was easier to catch a ride because everybody showed up on Saturday, but at the same time, everyone was very good-natured about it, and it was very successful. The type of event that when we can squeeze out a little time in our schedules, it's really fun for our department to be able to put on because it's just fun, it's free, it brings people out to enjoy one of our park resources. We're now in the process of doing some refurbishment of the building. It hasn't really been touched for 20 years on the interior, so it's going to get painted and the doors, some automatic motors for the doors. We're working with some recreation service providers, trying to find opportunities to have actual recreation programs in the building. Plus, we also think it'd be a great opportunity for special events and support the type of activities that we have in that area of the park. So although it's a sad day, we are very grateful for what we had for the time that we have. And I'd also point out that Historic Carousels has a carousel in Long Beach and also one in San Diego, which are located in very highly trafficked tourist areas. very different from what we have in Santa Barbara. So if anybody's traveling down the coast and they need to ride a historic carousel, there are some other opportunities. And I think we promised we would go up to Hood River at some point and visit the one that was in Santa Barbara for so long. So with that, I also want to talk about the Rose Garden pruning. We have it every year. We have a slew of volunteers that come out to help prune. If you've been by there, it's different. It's been pruned for the winter. This is something that our Parks Division organizes every year. Santos Escobar heads it up, and we work very closely with Dan Bufano, Zarian, to help train people on how to do it properly. We're also working with him to look at ways that we can re-energize some of the rose beds at the garden. Nothing lasts forever, and so we're looking at opportunities to perhaps make some improvements where we can. So that was a successful event. And then yesterday, prior to a very long council meeting, we had a celebration of the golf club's 60th birthday with a proclamation from the mayor. And when you think back and you look back in Santa Barbara history and how all these different properties became what they are today, how many people know that there was a hospital on that site? You know, and how would we have ever known that the golf course has only been there for 60 years? Because there's this generation, as our generations continue, we know what we know and we don't know what we had before. So it's exciting to us to be able to celebrate that. We have more events planned in the spring when the golfing season really gets into gear and we can be guaranteed there's good weather. But we're excited that we're able to do that and encourage everyone to go out and play golf as much as they want. Despite the tragedy and the chaos that we've experienced in the community, it's a great place to go recreate and have some time to be with friends and fellow recreationists. I also didn't put in the report, but I need to recognize that tomorrow we have our ribbon cutting ceremony for Kids World. Kids World is 25 years old, although I don't know what percent of it is actually maybe 25 days old, because as you know, we took a lot of it apart and put it back together with new wood, new fittings, new brackets, relocated pieces, met new playground safety standards, replaced the outside fence, did a number of things. Like many of our projects, I seem to be saying we've been working on this for so many years. This one was 10 years in the making. Started with $60,000, multiplied that by 10, and we now have a playground that we plan to keep operating for another 25 years. It's already the oldest wooden playground. It will really be the oldest wooden playground. Very, very unique community asset that many, many people adore, and certainly we're going to keep it around for as long as we can. So we're having a kind of a gentle ribbon cutting tomorrow because of all of the things going on in the community. We're planning something a little bit later in the spring. We have a time capsule that was buried when the playground was first put in. It's been taken out. We're planning to rebury it and thought that would be a great community event, and some other things that we could do that are youth focused. So stay tuned for that as it comes up.
Great. Are there questions of Ms. Zachary about her report? Okay. That brings us to Franceschi House. Oh my goodness. The years go by. Franceschi House doesn't change.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, I will be providing this report to you, although I can say many department staff, directors have wrangled over what to do with Franceschi House for many years. We've been working on the latest iteration for the last couple of years and are preparing to go to council with some recommendations, and we would like you to also make a recommendation on behalf of the project so that we can hopefully keep moving it forward. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of the house and the park, the options that we've looked at now and that have been considered in the past, some of the stakeholder discussions that we've had, which has been a really important process over the last 2 years, and then get to our recommendations. Your staff report has kind of what we've been doing lately, and then there's an attachment which provides much more detail that was presented to council back in 2015. So Franceschi Park in the house was gifted to the city in 1931, and at the time the city accepted it on the condition that it would receive some funding from the Riviera Association for maintenance, and that was, I think, $1,200 a year. So I think of today's dollars, completely different ballgame. It now comprises about 15 acres. It is a beautiful location. There are, the Riviera, there's a reason why it's called the Riviera, has great views. You look out to the ocean, and on a clear day, it's really quite stunning and a wonderful place to be. It's also, in some ways, one of Santa Barbara's best-kept secrets, which can be okay because it doesn't have a large parking lot, and it is doesn't have a lot of places to walk. We have some walking paths. It's not an active park. It's a passive area. It does have a few picnic areas. We do have a city staff person that lives in the caretaker residence, and they open and close the park. And we have a couple of other locations like that in the city. We have a restroom that I believe was put in the 1950s. It still works, but it's not something that will be there forever. I mentioned limited parking. What's really special about this site, besides its location and its view of the city, is the horticultural legacy of Dr. Franceschi. And the house itself embodies some of that because it was his home, and then also Alden Freeman, who purchased the property from Franceschi's family, who also made some modifications and ultimately donated it to the city. So it has significance. It was designated a city structure of merit, which can complicate what we do in the future because of its historical significance. So it's now 2018. Since 1971, there's been discussion about whether to demolish the house or not. And a master plan was approved by City Council back then. It did include horticultural renovation and house demolition. That didn't move forward. Instead, Pearl Chase Society came forward in 1981 and started a campaign to restore the house. At that time is when the structure of merit designation moved forward. Oops. I don't usually do this way. Let's go this. There we go. So between 1985 and 1988, efforts were made to develop plans to restore the house, and funds were secured actually through some grant sources. It quickly determined that the funding was inadequate to actually achieve the restoration that was needed, and those funds actually got redirected to Korea Recreation and Korea Gym. We have included the house renovation and park improvements in our capital program for years and years. And you'll get to see our capital program again in a couple of months. We redo it every 2 years. We have over $100 million in capital needs in parks and recreation. So even though it's in the capital program, everything gets prioritized, and it's one of those projects that always went to the bottom of the list for a number of reasons. The cost, the location, the challenge that it provides from a management standpoint, really the limited use it would have for the general public because of use conditions, access, etc. And so we have other priorities. Our waterfront parks are high priority. Our playgrounds are high priority. So as you can imagine, they rose to the top far more frequently than Franceschi House and Park. We did develop an arrangement with the Pearl Chase Society where they developed plans to renovate the house. They promised to secure funding. The city helped seed some of that funding. The Park Foundation held funds for that purpose. And in 2003, the Parks and Recreation Department developed and City Council approved a master plan that included not only what would happen when the house was renovated and how it would be operated, but also what we would do to improve the surrounding park area. Pearl Chase Society did successfully develop their plans. They did get conceptual approval by the Historic Landmarks Commission and the Parks and Recreation Commission. And then it all stalled out again. It stalled out because fundraising was challenging. In 2010, as Chair Longstreet will remember, our department was shedding in response to the economic challenges the city was facing, and our capital program was severely reduced. And the city's job throughout this process has been to make the site improvements so that once the house was renovated and open for use, we had the other improvements in place in the park to serve the house. So without the city funding to do the site improvements and challenges for Pearl Chase to raise the funds to actually do the renovation, we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place in this area. So it's essentially stayed the way it has been. We, through the years, talking to Pearl Chase Society, ultimately went back to council in 2015 and ended the relationship that we had with them, and acknowledged that house renovation wasn't an option. At the time, there was a recommendation from staff. We should really move forward looking at the feasibility of something else on the site, which would include taking the house down. City Council wasn't ready to take that step. Pearl Chase Society wanted to explore another option further. So we went away and did some more work, which is what we've been doing for the last 2 years. And we looked at 3 options. One, we unearthed the full house restoration and master plan implementation option. And that would include essentially a lot of what was designed by the Pearl Chase Society with a scale back, because what we learned through evaluating the feasibility of the project is, from an accessibility standpoint, if we were going to make the 3rd floor usable, we'd need an elevator. So that is a complicating factor. We also discovered that any change to the house, and we knew this before and we verified it, would require foundation rebuild. That's a significant expense. And then also looked at how the house would ultimately be used and what kind of revenue it would generate. So originally we had anticipated we could rent the 3rd floor out as a rental, so we could generate revenue that way. Looking at the deed restrictions and then also the city's charter restrictions, it not feasible to do that. As you can imagine, the surrounding neighborhood has a lot of concerns about the activity at that park, and also concerns about how much use there really would be, and wanting to limit that use because of the potential impact to the neighborhood. So really scaled it way down to the point where having the type of house access that was originally envisioned in 2003 is not feasible. So when we looked at this option, we really looked at it as restoration and minimal use. So maybe, so it could be, for example, used by 30 people at a time, reservation only, not necessarily going to generate much revenue at all in order to support that. Rehabilitation and preservation of the exterior. This is an option that the Pearl Chase Society explored, and that really meant they would sort of restore the exterior, probably to the Alderman Freeman period, so somewhat like it looks today, but then secure the interior. You wouldn't be able to go in. It would be secured in place. You'd be able to walk around it, and then essentially that would be it. And then we really spent a lot more time looking at, well, what do we really want to consider for this site? Because ultimately, it's a park. We have an opportunity to look at enhancing park use and park access. Yet at the same time, we want to acknowledge the horticultural heritage and legacy of Dr. Franceschi and the importance of this park in the city's park inventory system. And looking at and evaluating the ways that we could actually create some sort of interpretive pavilion in the footprint of the existing house. So it does mean that the house would be, in this case, and in any case, frankly, would be deconstructed, and we would incorporate certain elements of the house. People often look to the medallions, if you notice the medallions on the exterior, and other stained glass windows, things that really remind people and represent aspects of the house that are valued. Other aspects of the house would be very difficult to include in a pavilion because we wouldn't propose, for example, that it have a roof over it for a variety of reasons. So those items we would hope that we could find other homes for, or salvage through a historical auction process that could support renovation. We looked at the costs for each one, and essentially looking at site improvements, which I'll go over very briefly, house improvements, and then the other two, if the exterior was done or an interpretive pavilion was done. And so as you can see, when we're looking at the house, it's about double of either of the other options. It's not really feasible to think that we would generate those funds, or that the project would likely rise in priority over so many of our other needs that the city would prioritize this. Pearl Chase Society doesn't have the capacity to raise these funds. The rehab and preservation of the exterior of the house, that's something that we communicated back to the Pearl Chase Society. If they really wanted to pursue that, it really would be their project. That investing city funds in something like that wouldn't necessarily bring us the park use benefit that we would want to achieve. And so the staff focus has really been more on the interpretive pavilion concept. So we also looked at the site improvements, because once again, you can't do anything to the house without improving the site, and there's some pretty significant issues. We looked at the master plan and its options, and it was based on, as I mentioned earlier, its use as a public facility, having an interpretive center and a library, a rental residence. The master plan envisioned we'd develop a new restroom somewhere on the site, we'd renovate all of the pathways, and essentially do major horticultural work throughout the park. In 2003, some of it may have been more feasible than it is today, as the ADA laws have continued to expand. While it's important to make sure we do what we can from an accessibility standpoint, because of this location, it would be very difficult to achieve that because of the way the pathways are organized, essentially zigzagging across the property. And then I mentioned deed restrictions and charter limitations. When we look at all of that, we realize, okay, no matter what we do, we have to revise this master plan because it's not realistic. We couldn't do it today. We would scale it way back. And then, so what we looked at instead is what do we need to do to improve the site to meet the access needs for whatever we did in the vicinity of the house, because that has to happen, and the site's structural needs that need to happen, while also doing some horticultural improvements. Not the whole park. It's really not realistic. We currently spend about $60,000 a year at that park, and if we were to go forward, we'd be looking at quadrupling that cost, which isn't realistic given our budget in our Parks Division. So specifically, we hired an engineering firm, Flowers and Associates. We also hired a soils firm to look at the soils on the site, particularly as it related to the house and the foundation, what kind of structural needs. What we learned through our soils survey is that if the house were to remain in any form, it would likely need some sort of caissons and shallow footings to stabilize the foundation. That's the short version of the report. The interpretive pavilion, uncertain. It really depends on what the design is. When we worked with our engineering firm, what we focused on, and I'll give you an orientation. So here's the lower driveway for everyone to remind how to access. And this is closed to the public right now. The caretaker residence that we have is over here. The access that most people get to the park is up here. So the house footprint, this is not the greatest slide, is right around here. And for those of you who are familiar with this site, when you come down here, the house, and you see the house, this whole area is dilapidated and crumbling. And as you go out to the turnaround, the concrete that's placed there is actually concrete that was salvaged from the 1925 earthquake. So it's got value. It's undulating. The footing surface is not great. And there's benches here that are basically falling off the hill. So what we asked our engineers to do is basically tell us what we would need to do to secure this section without going overboard, as well as provide an accessible parking space to make sure that there was access to this location. So that's sort of the conceptual design that we've developed. We would have a retaining wall that came all the way along here and continued around here. This area that you see that's kind of thatched is areas of the concrete that would be removed and replaced to create a flat surface. And then we would have a a permeable asphalt path that would go out to a lookout. So we essentially provide access along the length of this section of the park with the parking spot in this sort of diagonal area. Above the house, this hillside's also crumbling. Rather than tackle any of the pathways here, which would require us regrading the entire hillside, which is not a feasible thing to do, we would just establish a retaining wall that would go along here, rebuild it. And then the idea would be the interpretive pavilion would be within this footprint. And if we move forward with designing something like this, we obviously would look further at what kind of access would be needed around it as well, without knowing further what it would look like. And that we would have a demonstration garden. So maintenance considerations, we also looked at those I mentioned. The cost, what we spend now is very minimal. We've always spent very little money in this location. We focus on basic needs and then also compliance with the wildland fire plan. If we were to move forward with the house restoration and the master plan, that would send us into a maintenance requirement that far exceeds what our ability is. Even if we looked at the exterior preservation of the house, there are facilities costs that our facilities staff said would be involved in that option. And then there would be some costs related to the interpretive pavilion and modified park improvements. The goal here is to get to the point where we have a management strategy that we can actually follow and implement versus a pie-in-the-sky one that then people are discouraged when we can't move forward with it. So I mentioned the Pearl Chase Society. We worked very closely with them over the past couple of years, discussing the options. They did a lot of work to look at that second option in terms of the exterior of the house. Once we had our soil study results, and they realized that some of that foundation work might be needed, it was a huge unknown, and that the city wouldn't be recommending moving forward with that option and recommending that city funds be used for that purpose. They abandoned that idea and aren't recommending it. And instead, we spent more time working with the board to talk about what this interpretive pavilion could really be and how it could, if designed appropriately, could hopefully address the historic needs and the horticultural legacy of Dr. Franceschi, yet also serve the broadest section of Park Public. After a couple of meetings and a site visit, we did receive support from the Pearl Chase Board for the interpretive pavilion concept. I've also been talking to the Riviera Association. They've been very active over the years related to the house and the park from a fire standpoint, and frankly, it looks terrible, and it's really something needs to be done. We've been saying it for years, but now we really need to do it. Met with them on Monday, and at that time the board also supported the interpretive pavilion concept. As you can imagine, there's concern about, well, where's the money going to come from and when are you going to do it, and so on and so forth. But at least we're closer to having some consensus as to what we could do. We have $200,000 in our capital program, and so the recommendation to council would be to give us direction to take those funds and hire an architect engineering firm to start conceptualizing with our objectives for what an interpretive pavilion might be, and move forward with that. And then we have to get a project that's doable before we then worry about how we'll fund the rest of it. And we've learned that over the years. We spend a lot of time trying to get to a project that's doable, and as we develop that, we find ways to fund it, and that's what we would do in this case. So the staff recommendation, and that we're asking the commission to concur with, is to move forward with further evaluating the feasibility of an interpretive pavilion, acknowledging that there are some design challenges, and then also environmental review will be kind of tough because it is a historic resource, and so there will be impacts that will be difficult to mitigate, but we want to see the extent to which we can come up with a project that minimizes those, and move forward with doing something that's as feasible as possible given the location and the historic value of the site. With that, happy to answer any questions, take any discussion, and yes, that is what the house looks like.
And I will tell you, the inside looks 100 times worse. it looked terrible 22 years ago when I came on the commission. We're talking ivy growing up through the sink pipes. It is not salvageable, in my opinion. Just a little historical perspective. The commission, what was that, 2001 or so, voted to demolish the house. And we recommended to City Council to have the house demolished because of the condition, because of the limited use. Once we really sat down and we worked with neighbors, there were quite a number of public hearings. The access to Franceschi Park is not good. It's not like you could send busloads of kids up there. The neighbors are really concerned. When we were really seriously trying to figure out the uses of it to the general public of Santa Barbara, and it'd be a lovely spot to have a wedding. No noise. So the limit, it just became smaller and smaller, the amount of uses we could have in the area. My personal feeling is Dr. Franceschi's legacy is horticultural. The house has been cannibalized over the years. The medallions are a special piece of it, but Dr. Franceschi lived in it for like 9 years or something, and then Freeman's changed it. I mean, it's not intact to be Dr. Franceschi's house. So there was a lot of discussion over the years, and I think the window for saving it, honestly, was probably 35, 40 years ago, not even when I was on the commission. But now to see this, it saddens me that we weren't able at that point to move forward with the horticultural aspects of the park when it was salvageable and when we could have probably kept things up. But now we're at this stage, and I think it is the most realistic to look at the removal of the house for safety reasons and for aesthetics, and so that's sort of a long-range historical perspective on Franceschi House. Some difficult meetings we had at that point. Are there other questions of staff about usage or how this plan would impact budget or community or whatever? Comments? Go. Yeah.
I'm leaning towards going with the staff recommendation for safety and budgetary concerns, but my personal history with the house is a couple years back, my son and I used to spend afternoons up there reading To Kill a Mockingbird out loud, and we would run around and he would pretend that Boo Radley was running out of house. So it was kind of our own personal interpretive pavilion, and I'm worried about over sanitizing our parks and our playgrounds in our city. Although I understand for budget and safety reasons, we probably need to let the house go, but there's a lot to be said for ramshackle mystery, and that's what that house represents for my family.
Ms. McGill?
So I can't pretend to the great history because I'm relatively new to Santa Barbara, but I have spent time in Franceschi Park. And it is beautiful, and it's quite a gift, but also obviously a bit of a poisoned chalice. And it's one of these things that just looking at it kind of, I don't want to use the word coldly because that's not what I mean, because it's a spectacular spot. Objectively, thank you. It's one of these things where I worry that the budget monies will always be just a little bit low on the priority. The budget and money will always be an issue for a property where my last experience is I went up there with a small SBC C-Class, and we took up and I do mean small, and we took up the entire parking lot. So there's always going to be limited use, which will make it difficult to prioritize your funds. And My concern is that the history and the heart and the feeling will allow for a continuation of kind of throwing good money after bad, because it will never quite get to the resolution that everyone likes, or just so it'll be easier not to decide. So I'm not opposed to the interpretive pavilion. It seems like the best of the options that are in front of you. I'm actually concerned that even that's too much, and that the real answer is, to go back to what the chairman said, the legacy is horticultural, and horticulture is green things that grow, and maybe that's a direction that might be more feasible.
Other comments? Mr. Perry.
It seems to me that Franceschi's legacy is spread throughout our city already. So there is a deep-rooted legacy. Doesn't he have some responsibility for the development of Alameda Park as well, and the trees? Preservation of that is important. I used to go there fairly frequently in the early 70s, and I saw the disrepair. It's not really been touched or done anything with it. It's not really an asset. It is a bit of a liability. I have some of your memories too. I loved going up there, but the house was almost a secondary item. What I'd be interested to know is, are the stairs included in the restoration concept? The stairs that go down from APS to the city?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Perry, we haven't even addressed that part of the park in this discussion. Our focus has been entirely on the area in the vicinity of the house. I think Commissioner McGill acknowledged part of the reason why that is, because the resources that we have are limited. That doesn't mean it couldn't be addressed in the future, because the access and use of Franceschi Park, if anything, is the highest priority from a passive standpoint, and not to create it as a destination to do something active. And so looking at ways that we maintain access over time is important. For this particular discussion, it's really just focused. We tried to narrow it down to try to come up with something that we thought was doable and that we could move forward with, even if, yes, there are some challenges ahead. Can we really design something and build it and maintain it? It'll really depend on the focus of that design and where it ends up. But those are key considerations for sure.
Has a greenhouse been part of the conversation, since it's horticultural in nature?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Perry, we've talked about it. We know where something like that could go. It is not a park where we would develop a new structure, because once you do that, you start having to deal with other management issues. In fact, one of the recommendations we will make if we do revise the master plan is that when the restroom, which is nestled into the hillside, is no longer functional, we wouldn't be recommending building a new one. But the cost to build a restroom alone is significant, and we don't anticipate the neighbors would be super happy about it. We don't anticipate the restrooms going anywhere anytime soon. It's actually built quite sturdily, but those are the types of things that we're really grappling with, is not to intensify the use, yet make it a more friendly and usable space for the park-going public that do go there.
Comments, questions?
Yeah, I have a question about the designation as a structure of merit. Does that mean that it's a historical property, or that it has historic architectural design elements? I guess it doesn't sound like it from the discussion, but I'm just curious to know that.
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Martinez-Cohen, yes. As a designated structure of merit, it does have historical significance. And that's one of the challenges we'll face as we move forward with whatever the next steps are, if it includes essentially putting something else, an interpretive pavilion, within this site. So from an environmental standpoint, we all need to do a focused EIR, focused on historic resources. We need to update the historic sites structures report. We would do that based on a concept plan so that we could evaluate the extent to which our proposal mitigates the loss of that resource. And there are steps that you take under Secretary of Interior standards when something like a resource like this can't be restored or retained. Those are all the things that we would have to do. In fact, that would be a pretty significant undertaking to get to the next step, no matter what we do. And I think our approach here is, can we envision what it will be versus what it's not, or what will go away, so that we can move towards something that we get more community buy-in and support on that. Knowing that there will be a loss, we're currently losing their resource every day, that there's no investment in there.
Okay. Well, I think it is time to move forward again and to at least start the planning phase. We all know that the implementation phase can take 10 years. So Cabrillo Ball Field we saw earlier. So, but I think I'm happy to see this moving forward in this way. It was stalled in the fundraising phase for so long, where we made no headway, and every winter there's more deterioration. I know you put the roof on the house to sort of stave off it falling down, but that is again not where our resources need to be. It needs to be in something creating something useful to the community. Would anyone like to make a motion on this item? This is for action. We've received the presentation, but the recommendation from staff is that City Council direct staff to further explore the feasibility and develop conceptual plans for the development of an interpretive pavilion. Is that something that is agreeable to this commission?
So I will make a motion that the commission support the staff recommendation to won't get this exactly right, but move forward with the feasibility and planning of an interpretive pavilion.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Discussion. Okay, all in favor? Wait, yes.
The only thing I wanted to say is that by voting in favor of that recommendation, I don't think for me, it's not going to mean that I agree with the demolition yet. I just agree with moving forward on a feasibility and conceptual plan for an interpretive pavilion.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you.
I'm going to abstain.
You're going to abstain? Yeah. Oh, okay. Usually you abstain. Yeah. Abstentions are more for if there's a reason to abstain, like
Yeah.
conflict of interest kind of thing.
Conflict of interest.
Then I would vote no against the motion.
Okay, so we have one no. Okay, thank you.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, also, although you usually have action minutes, if you notice from your meeting minutes, for an item like this, we'll make sure we document all the comments that you made on this item and forward those to City Council so that they have the discussion that you had and the considerations that you have for this project.
Thank you. And now we are returning to item 5A.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, item 5A1 is 1700 East Cabrillo Boulevard. I have with me Alex Ubaldo from Public Works, who will go through and with his support team describe the project in concept to you so you can understand in more complexity. Essentially, there is like a roundabout at this intersection, which necessitates the removal of city-owned trees, which is why the item is an action item for you, at least as far as the trees are concerned. Then once they wrap up their presentation, it'll come back to me and I'll share with you the Street Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation. With this, that'll give you Alex Abueldo.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Longstreet, Commissioners. First, we'd like to apologize for being late. We were stuck at the HLC meeting, but we thank you for accommodating us at this time.
No problem.
Again, as Tim had mentioned, my name is Alex Abueldo with Public Works Engineering. I'm here to give you a quick project description, introduction, and then I'll be introducing our consultants who will go into the details of the project. So this is a joint effort between SBCAG and the City Public Works Department. The primary purpose of this project is to make East Cabrillo Boulevard corridor safer for pedestrians and bicyclists by creating a new multi-use path, sidewalk, and bike lanes. And this will eliminate a quarter-mile infrastructure gap and allow access to and from the coastal recreational areas and commercial areas along Los Patos Way and Coast Village Road. Is it changing on its own?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, I apologize. We may be flipping back and forth. The presentation is changing on its own, so I apologize.
Keeps you on your toes that way.
Definitely, yeah. So this project is also going to be improving the circulation and the queuing impacts that would result from the Highway Occupancy Vehicle Project, known as the HOV project, that's managed by Caltrans. So the project's planning and design phase, it's funded by Highway Safety Improvement Program and also State Transportation Improvement Program that's administered by Caltrans. So today here with me, I'll have our consultant take over and explain more in details about the project and why the need for the tree removals. And this is Mr. James Favor with TY Lin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Chair Longstreet and distinguished commissioners, thank you very much for listening to us this evening and also being patient for us getting here. And sorry we're a little late. What I'd like to do is re-roll the presentation back to the beginning so I could spend a little bit of time just explaining what we're doing with the project and why we need to remove the trees. The project location is near the Andrea Clark Bird Refuge. It is where the Union Pacific Railroad Bridge crosses over Cabrillo Boulevard. And so what we're going to be doing, go ahead if you don't mind, Tim. What we're going to be doing is a couple of different aspects of the project. As shown here, the first project feature is to include bike lanes and a multi-use path and sidewalks. The general purpose of the project is to provide a wider opening under the Union Pacific Railroad Bridge for pedestrians and bicyclists and also for vehicles in kind. So providing the bike lanes and the sidewalks and the multi-use path achieves this purpose. At the same time, what we're doing is project feature number 2, which is the roundabout. We went through a pretty extensive analysis to analyze the roundabout versus a signalized intersection. And there was the project required the intersection be upgraded. And so we did that analysis, and the analysis recommended a roundabout, which basically becomes a much safer alternative to a signal. You can imagine that being the case. The speed in and out of the roundabout is a lot slower, and so the ability to see pedestrians and bicyclists, which is the purpose of the project, is greatly enhanced with a roundabout. The third feature is to replace the bridge, and so the bridge was built in 1917. It still does have a little bit of life to it. However, the problem with it is the width of the roadway below. The tree removal locations, this exhibit shows tree removal locations. What you see in the colors, let's talk about the colored arrows first. What you see in the blue arrow to the lower left and then along Cabrillo are the proposed Class 2 bike lanes. So there's going to be a bike lane on either side of the roadway, a Class 2 bike lane. What you also see is the existing multi-use path is the gray, and it's shown right by the right side there. So we're going to be matching into the path that is built that is on the other side of the current freeway location. So we have a nice path there, but it just ends nowhere, and so we're going to close the gap with our path. And you can see that as the red multi-use path. Now, with the tree removal locations for the project, there are a couple different locations. One, if you look up adjacent right in that area there, Alex, if you can go back to the ones on the Union Pacific, we'll talk about the ones that aren't. So there's a couple locations there where we're going to be removing trees on the Union Pacific right-of-way. Union Pacific does not really care. And so we've asked them, would you really like to have them replaced? And they said, we don't care. And in fact, a lot of these are trees that are basically invasive and non-native, and so understandably it's not a benefit to their operations. And so we have a couple of ideas. One is to replace them and put them in Caltrans right-of-way, right adjacent to and north of the Union Pacific right-of-way, or the second option is to put them in the cemetery. On private property, and we've had discussions with the manager of the cemetery, and he does not have an objection to replacing those trees within the cemetery property. His one stipulation is as long as we don't group them all together, if we spread them out over the entirety of the property. What we're going to do, however, is the first option is to approach Caltrans, because it's logical. That's where the trees are being removed from, close enough, and so we want to see what the HOV project it could accommodate the tree locations. The second one we want to show you the area is where the 10 trees are that we're talking about, the street trees. There's on that side where Alex is showing right there. There's 3 trees that are impacted by the construction of the roundabout. And so we would remove those trees, but then replant another tree adjacent to them outside the limits of the roundabout and the paths, the sidewalks and paths of the roundabout. On the east side of Cabrillo, in the current island, there are 7 trees that will be impacted because in order to build the roundabout, we have to slice off a piece of the island. And so these 7 trees will be replaced in the location where the island will not be impacted.
Can I ask,
Sure.
I went over to the site today. How many trees are in that island? There's quite a few.
There are, yeah. I would think in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 or maybe even more. We've really never counted the ones that we weren't impacting, but I think for sure that there's at least 30 in there.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. This is an exhibit that we put together that shows in another plan view the red X's are the locations where the trees are being removed. Then the lower portion, the lower left-hand portion, are the 10 that we talked about that we're talking about today. And then the blue are protect-in-place trees. They're not impacted by the construction, but they're close enough to the construction that we want to be able to make sure that they're protected in place. And then the red at the upper are the ones we talked about in Union Pacific right away that we want to be able to relocate to the Caltrans right away or the cemetery. The project right now is in the current environmental review phase. We are producing technical reports for the NEPA because it does have federal funding. So, and we're also doing the same for CEQA, and hence a lot of discussion with the HLC. Current project schedule shows that preliminary engineering, we should be done with the environmental document hopefully by this spring. That may lag into the summer. And then with plans, specifications, and estimates, we anticipate finalizing that by next spring. And then construction, dependent upon funding, can occur as early as the summer of 2019. We don't anticipate that it will, but we're working towards that goal. Let's see, the Street Treat Advisory Committee recommendations. Okay, sorry. Thank you, Tim.
So, Chair, Longstreet and Commissioners, why is the presentation moving forward? Don't know. The Street Tree Advisory Committee supports the project. They see the value of slowing traffic down in that location, and their recommendation is to approve the removals on the condition that the trees are replaced with 10 replacement trees, 2 of those being 15-foot tall Mexican fan palms, 3 20-foot, 2 25-foot, and 3 30-foot. They commented that the size differential would provide for an age diversity in the area. Most of the trees in the Cemetery Island are very tall, the same age, and as we start to lose those, we're going to lose multiple trees. So with the size difference, it provides a little bit of age diversity.
I'm a little bit confused. So the trees are going to be planted back in the Cemetery Island, or all 10?
Chair Longstreet, there's ample space in the island for additional trees. As the consultant mentioned, there's a plan to plant 1 tree in the area on the corner of the bird refuge to replace those 3, and the remaining 9 would go in the Cemetery Island.
On the bird refuge side, as you drive through, there's clumps of 3s all the way along there. Is 1 going to be sufficient, or should some of these replacement trees be in a clump of 3 for aesthetics?
Chair Longstreet, in design review, trees look better when they're in odd numbers. So that's part of the reason of clumping, to provide 3 trees in a close proximity. It's that aesthetic reason. 1 tree is also an odd number, so it wouldn't look out of place necessarily. And certainly we could explore options about final placement and clumping more trees.
I would like it considered, because 1 palm tree sometimes looks like a telephone pole. And 3 are aesthetically pleasing. Just, okay, sorry, keep going. Is that the end of that's okay? Are there any questions?
That's all that we have.
Any of the team up here? Yes, Ms. McGill.
One, just an education question that's 10-second, totally unrelated to trees. What's a Class 2 bike path?
A Class 2 bike path is inside the roadway, and so there's a couple different versions of it. One is a Class 1, which is immediately off the roadway, and so there's a separation. Class 2 is adjacent to a travel lane, and then there's such a thing as a Class 3 as a share shoulder.
Okay, thanks. And then onto trees. So referencing back to some earlier designation changes when there was a lot of discussion about species diversity, has there been discussion of species diversity here? Is this really like-for-like replacement for aesthetic reasons? Just curious as to the rationale.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner McGill, the designated tree for Cabrillo Boulevard is the Mexican fan palm. So the proposal is consistent with that, also replacing palms with palms. So it's kind of same for same. The diversity, when we look at diversity, we look at areas where it makes sense to do that. And in this area, it is predominantly, it's an entrance into the city. The beachfront is very predominantly Mexican fan palms. It's very consistent here. So from a tree diversity standpoint, this is probably not the location that we would do that.
I just have a comment. I actually frequent that area very often, and I run on the shoulder where there's no path, and I always was wondering why they did so much work for the roundabout by Coast Village Road, and then it's a beautiful sidewalk and then it ends. Right. So I'm really glad that you guys are doing this. I'm very supportive of the whole Caltrans side of it. That underpass, too, where the Union Pacific Railway is, it's a little sketchy, for lack of a better word. There's lots of homeless activity right there, and I think, making a project right there that connects everything and makes it a little safer makes a lot of sense. And for that reason, I'm in support of this. Obviously, you have to remove some trees so that you can accomplish a very important project. So with that, I would like to make a motion to concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation to approve the removals on the condition that the replacement trees with the different heights and everything be planted.
I'll second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Any further comments or discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, he passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
I think we're all excited to see that connection happen with some of the improvements made around the bird refuge and everything, and giving more access from that side of the community down to the beach. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
All right. I believe that concludes our agenda. I hope that people can come tomorrow for the ribbon cutting if you're available at Kids World and 11 o'clock. And with that, we will close our meeting. We are adjourned. Thank you.